Hi everybody, this is Chris. I realize I've done quite a lot of instructional videos, so it's time to talk a little bit about how I learned Mandarin and about my own experience. So before I'd even left school, I decided that I wanted to study Chinese, and I was lucky enough to be accepted to study at the University of Cambridge on a Chinese course full time. I had a few hours of Chinese classes every week, on top of learning about Chinese history and other aspects of Chinese culture. But this wasn't the only thing I was doing. I did a lot of things outside class as well to boost my study, which I want to talk to you about. The one thing I would say about studying in a formal class environment is that it does help you to keep motivated in your study. I think in my case, having a teacher setting exercises and making me sit down and take a class was a big push at the beginning. I knew a lot of people who said that they were going to learn Chinese, but they gave up very quickly because they didn't have the discipline to get over the steep learning curve, and sometimes having a kind of a teacher or tutor can really help. So outside classes, I was doing a lot of practice writing Chinese characters, which I found very difficult at first, easily the hardest part of learning Chinese. In class, they basically taught us some ground rules for writing characters, and we didn't focus much on writing them slowly. So right from the beginning, I used software to show me how to write each Chinese character. I've done videos about how to do this, and I copied the guide time and time again until my characters started to look like authentic Chinese characters and became more smooth. At the beginning, I learnt the characters in the textbook, which was a beginner's textbook from the Beijing Language and Cultures University, which I wouldn't really recommend, and I was way behind with the spoken lessons and the character writing, but I tried to keep up the character writing when I had spare time. I used flashcards for vocabulary, and I used to practice writing Chinese when I was on the bus or when I was watching TV. After a while, when I'd learnt a lot of the basic characters, I started working through the most common Chinese characters, which you can search for online, learning to write them and their meanings and the pronunciations, and really drill them down. First, I had a goal to learn the most common 500 Chinese characters, then 1,000, then slowly I learnt the most common 1,500 and 2,000 Chinese characters. And I got up to that point slowly and steadily over a period of 2 years or more. Once I had a foundation in all of these common characters, I found that I could read much more easily and then even guess words based on the characters that were in them that I already knew. I always forgot how to write Chinese characters and I had to revise them, but I kept going back, and the more you see the characters, the more times you look them up, the better you remember them, even if you forget how to write some of them. A lot of people have asked me about resources that I use to learn Chinese, and the answer is yes, there are slightly better or slightly less good resources, but different ones are suitable for different people, and the most important thing is to keep going and maintain consistency in your study. I've developed my own Chinese learning courses at the moment based on my own experience, because I want to share my methods in getting conversational and putting sentences together quickly. At the beginning, I also used podcasts from Chinese Pod and Serge Melnik's, and I did all of the Pimsleur Mandarin levels. I watched various video series online, and I worked through a few teach yourself textbooks outside class. I always used electronic dictionaries to look up vocabulary. When I was in Taiwan in 2007, I used an electronic dictionary with a pen to look up words, but later on I got a smartphone and I downloaded Pleco, Pleco, and you can just write characters into that app for your phone with your finger. That's really useful. I was traveling to Taiwan or mainland China most summers by that point, and whenever I saw a character that I didn't know on the street or on a menu or on an advert or wherever, I would just write it into my phone and use that to look it up, letting my curiosity teach me effectively. And after a few months of doing that, I knew most of the characters on the Chinese menus that you normally see and the ones that you see out and about. In terms of listening, I downloaded short news podcasts in Mandarin, including the BBC Chinese News podcast and others, and I studied these short podcasts intensively. At the beginning, there were a lot of words that I didn't know, but when I didn't know a word, I paused the MP3 and I learnt to recognize the pinyin that I was hearing and be able to type it into my computer to look it up using just based on the sound of the Chinese. By doing this with no vocabulary list or text to go along with it, I slowly trained my ear to pick out the sounds of Chinese and understand more and more. After a few months of doing this intensively, I found the same news words were coming up again and again because they often use the same words, and it became much easier to understand these kind of texts, and I was looking up less and less. So after about 6 to 8 months, I could understand the vast majority of news radio, and then I also did the same thing for recordings on different topics. I personally don't like the podcast where there's a short bit of Chinese dialogue and then loads of English explanation or chat. So after a while, when I got through this news podcast, I started watching a lot of Chinese TV, mainly the chat shows, which are easier to understand, entertainment shows, interviews, and TV series where the language is not that difficult. And there's always subtitles on Chinese TV to help you, which is a really good safety net while you're learning. For reading, I generally use software on my computer like Wenlin and dim sum Chinese tools where you can paste in a text, and then when you move your mouse over the Chinese characters or words, it will tell you what they mean. The software will also tell you the pronunciation of all the characters, so it's useful for practicing speaking as well. This saved me loads of time looking up in dictionaries and allowed me to read without a lot of stress, picking up new vocab. So I did a lot of extensive reading like this, and I saved full sentences, including the new vocab, into the vocabulary software Anki, A-N-K-I, along with the pinyin pronunciation guide, which I use every day to train myself on vocabulary and make it stick. I just read a lot of news and information articles on things that I was interested in over a long period of time, and I also watched a lot of DVDs that I got in China of English films with Chinese subtitles, which was really relaxing and also taught me how to say a lot of everyday slangy things in Chinese. And I bought books in China for teaching Chinese people English, morning reading one passage a day, business oral English, or anything that had English with complete Chinese translations. You can get these books in China, and I used these books to teach myself how English was translated into Chinese, sometimes by comparing the texts, and sometimes by playing the English MP3 that came with the book and reading the Chinese text along or out loud. Doing this taught me how to put a lot of things in English into Chinese and how to translate a lot of things. To practice speaking, as well as the speaking classes that I had in university, I found that I was only able to talk really slowly at the beginning, and I made loads of mistakes. And sometimes it was very difficult to find the words quick enough when I was talking. So I practiced talking about different things in Chinese when I was out, for example, on my bike cycling around, or effectively talking to myself, thinking through different conversations and scenarios. Whenever I was going to be in a scenario like going to a shop or traveling, I would think how to say that in Chinese. And I traveled to China whenever I got the chance to speak with native speakers and had basic conversations at first, but I gradually built up my skills to more complex conversations. When I got a bit better, I used to try to interpret English TV into Chinese, or to try to interpret other people's conversations that I heard in English into Chinese in my head, to constantly get myself thinking in Chinese. It's often difficult when you're learning Chinese to figure out whether the words you're using are right when you're speaking or writing, and that's a question of knowing how to use words in context. That's why I always write down a few example sentences at the same time when I learn new vocabulary. And I also used to type in Chinese words into Google search or Baidu search to find examples of how to use them. I also have dictionaries that have example sentences, like my favorite is the Oxford Advanced Learners English to Chinese Dictionary, and websites of example sentences like nciku.com and Juku, JUKUU.com. If you search for these websites and also Chinese corpus online, there are great resources that will give you example sentences for any Chinese word that you were to type in. After learning Mandarin for about 6 years, I trained intensively as a Chinese to English interpreter, which helped me to hone my language skills even further. But that's another story. Basically, I just used every tool at my disposal, took my learning step by step, and I'm still learning new things to this day. It's best to see learning Chinese as something you never complete, but you just gain progressively, step by step. Okay, I hope it's been useful to hear about my experience learning Mandarin and how I learned the language, and I hope you've picked up some useful tips from this video. If you have any questions, feel free to leave me a comment and I'll get back to you. And please help me by subscribing to my channel, clicking the thumbs up button below this video, and visiting my website where you got my Chinese courses, which is fluentinmandarin.com. Okay, thanks for watching and see you next time.